All right, Tony, anytime you're ready.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you. Okay, we'll call to order the Hideout Planning Commission regular meeting and public hearing for July 20th, 2023. First thing on the agenda, there will be no anchor site for this meeting. The letter is on file to be viewed by the public if they so wish on the town website. Next is roll call. Tony's here. Glynis?
Here.
Jonathan?
Here.
Rachel?
Here.
Joel?
Here.
Peter?
Here.
Donna? Donna will be joining us in a few minutes, I assume, seeing that she said she can't make it today. She will be able to make it today. Next on the agenda, approval of the meeting minutes from the June 22nd, 2023 meeting. Does anybody have anything they would like to add or see changed in the minutes?
I would request that my comments made immediately prior to the vote be included in the meeting minutes.
Mr. Chair, it's Kathleen. I have added a sentence to the draft minutes to reflect Jonathan's statement. So in the before the motion on page 4 of 5 of the draft minutes I sent, it now has an additional sentence added which says Commissioner Gunn stated he was not comfortable with the precedent this recommendation could set. Jonathan, is that okay?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments in regard to the minutes? Okay, there being none, would someone like to make a motion to accept the minutes with the changes that Jonathan requested?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Would somebody like to second it?
I did.
Thank you. So we'll take a vote. Glynis,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Tony is a yes. Joel,
Yes.
Peter.
Yes.
Okay. Next thing on the list, the agenda items. Discussion and consideration of rescheduling the August 17th, 2023 regular planning commission meeting. I believe Glynis, Donna, and Rachel, you guys can't make the 24th.
I could make the 24th.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Glynis, you can't make it, correct?
Correct. I'm on a plane.
Okay, and I believe Donna had stated that she could not make it.
You do still have a quorum. It's just how comfortable, if Glynis and Donna really want to be involved in that meeting.
We also take into consideration, depending upon what happens with the 2 public hearings, there might not be a need for a meeting in August at this time. That's not to say something that can't come up between now and then.
Just out of curiosity, does the 31st work better than the 24th? Does that help? I mean, both of those dates are open.
Doesn't work for me. I'm not here.
Okay.
I leave on the 24th.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Does the 23rd work for anybody?
Yeah.
I'm around. I can do that.
23rd is fine for me.
Hang on a second.
Actually, Alicia, could we stick with the 24th? I'm actually flying on the night of the 23rd. I wouldn't be available.
Oh, shoot, sorry.
We still will have enough people for the 24th, so why don't we just leave it for the 24th then?
Why
Rather
did
than
we,
sit here and try to pick a date where that's going to work for the some people and not others.
Why did we have to move it from the 17th?
I apologize. I'm actually traveling the first couple of midweeks of August.
Oh.
I'll be out of country. I'm sorry.
No, oh, that's okay. I couldn't remember. Sorry.
So, is everybody okay with rescheduling it then to the 24th?
I'm fine.
That's fine.
Okay. So then we will reschedule the August 17th regular planning commission meeting to the 24th of August. Next, public hearings. Discussion and possible recommendation to the town council regarding a new zoning designation, residential casita. Thomas, would you like to take us through your
Sure.
report?
Can I make a request?
Sure.
Certainly.
Can we switch the order of these? Because if we don't have an overlay district for short-term rentals, I don't see the purpose of having a residential casita.
That's fair enough. I'm fine doing that if you are, Mr. Chairman. And just so you all know, both of these zones kind of were initiated as a result of the Bloom project and also as a result of Deer Springs Phase 8 proposals and discussion. And so both of these don't have a geography that would be associated with them yet. They would both be a part of the zoning ordinance, but they don't have a place. So if you did indeed adopt them, they don't have a geographical location. As if you were to give a positive recommendation tonight, they don't have a geographic designation that they would be located on within the town. They would just be a part of your zone. But actually taking them in the order that Glynis recommended is actually a pretty good one.
Thomas, Peter. Oh, sorry, Tony. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have no problem switching the order of them. Especially if one is more relevant or dependent on the other.
Thomas, Peter. So if I just want to make sure and I think I asked this question, but I just want to make sure I understand. Just because we adopt these doesn't mean they will ever happen, right?
That is correct. They've simply put a tool into your toolbox. They are not designated geographically anywhere within the town as a result of any vote tonight, positive or negative. They would not be allocated to a geographic designation. That's right. They would simply be a tool in your toolbox.
Thank you.
And Thomas, just to make things clear, if we give it a positive recommendation and somebody comes before us for a rezoning change, we could still either as part of the rezoning or part of the agreement, still not allow short-term rentals or casitas in that specific property, correct?
Is correct. It would be site plan specific, and it would be based upon the criteria within that zoning ordinance. But you're right. You would holistically look at that as a planning commission. That is correct.
Okay.
I would ask Polly, do we have, if you look at this, do we have objective criteria sufficient that if we did say no and it were challenged in court, is it your opinion that we would have a solid enough basis to prevail? Or do you think there are additional things we could put in there? Because I'm very concerned about opening up the floodgates here. And I think we need to avoid any chance that short-term rentals are going to start popping up in established areas. And so I just want to make sure that if somebody applies and we say no, we've got some sufficient objective criteria that our no will be upheld in court.
Well, so of course, courts are never totally predictable. However, based on the fact that a rezone is always a legislative action,
which gives you the highest level of discretion. And it just has to be rationally based. And the fact, unlike a lot of what you do in planning, which is more administrative, which is, well, if it meets these criteria, you have to grant something. For legislative, for rezones, for annexations, it's much more discretionary. So you can't deny something just because you don't like someone, for example, or because of some other kind of unconstitutional type thing. But as long as it's rational, that it's not arbitrary, then you would be on, it's the highest level of where the courts defer to your decision making. The other thing is that in what Thomas was kind of proposing, talked a lot about it being not in established zones, and he defines that, or established subdivisions. And he also talks about it being kind of part of a resort community. I'm trying to just find that in the staff report or in the language. Those are kind of some of the things that would kind of ensure that it would only be allowed in situations that, if you thought that those were kind of good standards. And I know I remember seeing
I
something.
think
Polly,
Go
can
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Who's that?
That was it. I was just kind of
Oh,
looking for the section. Oh, here it is. B, which is no short-term rental overlay zone may be located in an established residential neighborhood, which shall be defined as a subdivision that has more than 1/3 of the units built and with certificates of occupancy awarded.
Yeah, I think that's opening up a floodgate. I personally am uncomfortable with that. I think the threshold needs to be a lot lower.
Jonathan,
And our HOAs don't allow it, and they're gonna overrule this anyway.
Yeah, absolutely true, but at least in my case, the HOA hasn't been turned over to the owners yet. And so I've had a number of neighbors and residents express to me a concern about that kind of thing. So while I totally agree with you, I think that the threshold should be lower.
But isn't it the master development agreement that does not allow short-term rentals?
I believe,
That's
again,
correct.
you're correct, but again, at least the owners in my subdivision don't have any say on what the master says.
Right, and it says no short-term rentals.
yeah,
I
but
think what he's saying is that if it's still in the developer's hands, they could change the CC&Rs.
and the only thing I would say is I think Jonathan, you bring up a good point. I would say this, that outside of the MDA, the master MDA within the community, the Hideout Canyon MDA doesn't allow for nightly rentals. So the only areas that could be considered for nightly rentals would be Lakeview is not yet built. Deer Waters is built, so it could not be considered because it's more than 1/3 built out. Deer Springs could be considered, and Lakeview could be considered. Let me think about that. Claim is potentially
Claim already has night.
Claim has it already.
Claim is able to be considered, but Claim already allows it pursuant to their HOA agreement with the town. So the two that could be considered would be Lakeview and Deer Springs. So just keep that in mind. Those are the two that are not yet 1/3 built out.
So existing ones can't come back and ask for a change.
Based on this ordinance, no. If they're already 1/3 built out, their existing communities, their existing subdivisions, existing neighborhoods, they could not be considered for the short-term rental overlay.
But I have a follow-up to sort of Jonathan's point, which I share your concern, Jonathan. And this is Polly, I guess this is a question to you, right? If it's sort of formally adopted, and then, I mean, I don't really know how much more development there can be, but you know, if we put it out there as, hey, it's available to you, and we keep saying no, and keep saying no, is that just going to be a giant lawsuit at some point? And then we're battling this out in court?
Hideout is a very litigious community, so
Yeah,
I
I know
can't
that.
say that, but I guess it depends on why. If, you know, if, there's, you know, a subdivision that's already developed and it doesn't meet this criteria and you say no, then I think you legally are able to do that. If, let's say, Lakeview comes in and you say no, I mean, you'd have to give rational reasons for it, but it is discretionary.
Well,
But
but see, that's your point. You just make the point. You have to have rational reasons, and one man's rationality is another man's irrationality. So therein lies the problem. I think Jonathan was sort of getting to.
Yeah,
I would recommend to the planning commissioners that is up for discussion tonight. This is not an ordinance that is something you have to approve. It is something that has been discussed prior. It was earlier discussed relative to the Bloom project. That project has been that application has been withdrawn. And so the only other application that has requested this was initially phase 8 of the Deer Springs subdivision, which was on the phase 8 is the west side of Jordanelle Parkway. And early on, there was a discussion that the Planning Commission, the community thought that additional housing opportunities on that side of Jordanelle Parkway would be ideal. Right now, what's been approved as of the I think it was the 2017 preliminary subdivision is for townhouses over there, which is primarily what makes up the Deer Springs subdivision. The idea was that rather than townhouses, there could be cottages, and that would provide a diversity of housing product. And so that's really where this stemmed. Bloom actually built upon that. But again, that application's been withdrawn. And so this proposed ordinance really would potentially allow it in that area. But the way it's written, at 1/3 of the subdivision's certificates of occupancy, it could be in other phases of Deer Springs, which the developer has asked for. And so that's really up for discussion tonight. If that is unacceptable to the Planning Commission, this ordinance should not be approved. If it is acceptable to the Planning Commission, that's what we should discuss, what that value is, what that number, that metric is, that 1/3 value, and or are there other definitions for where we geographically limit nightly rentals?
Thomas, are you able to share with us some options to the 1/3 threshold that you might have come across in your work?
And does that 1/3 apply to each phase?
It would
So,
be
like-
1/3. It would be 1/3 of total, and we can clarify that. The theory is that it would be 1/3 of total. So, for example, the Deer Springs subdivision, phase 1 does already allow for nightly rentals. Phase 2A and 2B does not. And phase 3 is the next phase that would be presented to you. And then the subsequent phases have not yet been presented to you. If you remember, phase 8, again, is on the west side of Jordanelle Parkway. It's 34. The entitlement right now that's been approved is 34 townhouses, I think. And so the idea was that could we get a diversity of housing product? That's the cottages. So the 1/3 was intended to be per subdivision, per neighborhood, because per phase could start to get really, really hard. So it was per subdivision.
So shoreline, is that 1/3?
Shoreline is not allowed to have nightly rentals because the master HOA doesn't allow nightly rentals there right now.
Right.
But that could change.
It could change in the future. So you could make the argument that prior to the 1/3 threshold, I guess there could be an allowance for nightly rentals. I think Shoreline has, don't quote me on this, I think it has 750 total, 750 total units. And I think phase 1 and phase 2 account for it's about 3-ish hundred. So when those two are built out, they would cross over their 1/3. They would cross over the 1/3 threshold, so they wouldn't be allowed nightly rentals. But again, right now, that's in the master HOA, the master MDA. They're not allowed to have nightly rentals in that area.
So
The
back to
HOA
Deer
supersedes-
Springs, can we designate just that we wanted phase 8 to allow it? Or do we have to-
You absolutely could. In fact, that was really the initial, probably 3 months ago, that was the initial impetus for this project, was to create diversity in Deer Springs. I think there was generally support from town staff, and maybe, I won't speak for you all, but potentially from Planning Commission. Then at the subsequent meeting, the next meeting, the developer, Nate Brockbank, and his company and Homes said that phase 8 wasn't enough. That wasn't enough to make the nightly rentals work. If they were going to do that, they wanted additional phases, which were phases 2 and 3, and maybe a part of 4. And so I think that's where we left it. And we have not had any discussion publicly since then with you all. And so this ordinance is written such that it could potentially allow for nightly rentals on the east side of Jordan L. Parkway in Deer Springs. Again, it has to meet the criteria of the ordinance, but much of Deer Springs, because it's not yet fully built out, could meet the requirements of this ordinance. If you don't think that's appropriate, then I don't know that this ordinance would be an appropriate ordinance for you all to positively recommend to council. I would say that it's not it would not be an ordinance.
When you,
Right. Council.
Thomas, are you saying, when you say if it's not appropriate, you're saying the concept, or you're saying the 1/3 threshold?
No concept. If you don't think
Concept.
nightly rentals should be on the east side of Jordan L. Parkway in Deer Springs, I don't think this is the appropriate ordinance. When Nate came back to you all at the second meeting, you all tentatively gave a bit of a head nod, nothing formal, to phase 8. You said, oh, phase 8 on the west side of Jordan L. Parkway, that makes sense. It's disparate, it's discrete, it's separate from Deer Springs. We could start to see that area over there as nightly rental. But on the east side of Jordan L. Parkway, we have concerns. I'm paraphrasing, keep that in mind. The next meeting, Nate Brockbank came back and he said, it's kind of all or none. I don't just want phase 8. I want a couple of phases on the east side of Jordan L. Parkway, phases 2A, B, 3, and 4. I think there are 8 or 9 phases in Deer Springs. So that would be roughly half, give or take, of Deer Springs would be nightly rental. And so that's where we've landed. So this is an ordinance to address that discussion specifically. If you don't think it's appropriate to have nightly rentals on the east side of Jordan L. Parkway in Deer Springs, I don't think this is an appropriate ordinance. If you do think it's appropriate to have nightly rentals on the east side of Deer Springs in potentially phases 2, 3, and 4, then this may be an appropriate ordinance for you to consider. But that's really what's up for discussion. The only other subdivision that is outside of the master MDA is Lakeview. That's the only other one that's outside the master MDA and not yet built. So it's not yet built. So it's not 1/3 built. So that's why that 1/3 threshold has been incorporated into this ordinance. That's really the discussion for tonight.
I'd like to see us given the opposition to generalized nightly rentals from the survey that we had, as well as all of the input that Alicia has shared with us today, I'd like to see us take a very go slow approach. I think perhaps, we try allowing short-term rentals in the very north part of the town, see how well that goes before we launch the potential for nightly rentals in other areas of the town.
But what would be the metric that we would test success or not? Complaints? I mean, I think it's an interesting idea, but I'm just like, how do you measure success?
Well, Peter, you raise a very good point, and I think that's something that should be discussed. Complaints certainly would be, a one criteria, congestion, perhaps another. There's lots of criteria that could be used. I just think that I'm very concerned about opening the floodgates to the town. And I think if we want to try this, let's try it at the north end. If it goes well, then we can revisit this.
Jonathan, let me ask you a question more specifically. When you say the north end, does the north end mean the north end of the town of Hideout, which would be potentially Deer Springs, the 248 units that make up that development? Or does it mean something different in your mind?
It's something different. In my mind, that would be, Deer Springs already has a lot of nightly rentals there, and going north and east from there, I'm personally comfortable with. I was one of the people that expressed a tentative nod, as you put it, to Nate earlier. But I think opening the floodgates to the rest of the town south of Deer Springs, I don't see any. I'm really concerned that we might be making a huge mistake by opening the floodgates.
Okay, and Jonathan, could I make a quick statement? I think you meant potentially north and west, maybe of Jordanelle Parkway. I'm not exactly sure.
You're right, Thomas.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you for catching that. You are absolutely correct.
Okay.
Jonathan, you also have to remember too, we still have the ability to not grant them it if they petition for the Lakeview or any other property, and that might become before us if we have justifiable cause.
You're right, Chairman. I would say that with the metric at 1/3, Lakeview is not built out to 1/3 yet. It would be harder to say no because Lakeview is not yet built out. So that is something for you all to consider. Maybe there would be additional criteria that are incorporated into there, because it could be a little bit harder to say no because Lakeview is only, it's not even 5% built out, I think. And so that might be something that we want to consider.
I think there are no
also,
certificate of occupancy there.
Jonathan, you can consider adding the caveat that if you want to have short-term rentals in the area, you have to put in some commercial business that will self-support the short-term rentals, convenience store, cafe, something like that.
Yeah, I think if we go this direction, I think, Tony, that's a good idea. I just want to keep the floodgates closed, I guess, but I think that's a brilliant idea.
What about if we said something to the effect that if the, if it's already been approved, if one part of the project has already been approved, then sorry, you can't have the rest of the project.
Glennis, could I ask a question? Would that mean if it's been preliminarily approved, it may be okay, but if it's been a final subdivision approval, it's not okay? Because I will say this, Lakeview, for example, is outside the master MDA. It could qualify because it's not yet built out. It could qualify for nightly rentals. Deer Springs could qualify for nightly rentals based upon this ordinance. Would it be based on preliminary or final subdivision? Lakeview has final subdivision. Deer Springs does not, for example.
Well, that sounds like
that could be a definitive
solution.
Okay.
But I think you have the issue of the people who bought in early phases of these developments bought with the expectation. I mean, it's a selling point that there's no nightly rentals. And now you change, like, especially Lakeview, right? Where he's built like 6 homes.
But if it's a final
Lakeview is
approval.
not even built out yet, Peter.
Oh,
Yeah.
then I'm again confused by I don't know what it is then. Sorry. I was thinking about it was the Lakeview estate homes that Deer Waters is building.
No, Peter, you're actually right. So
Okay.
Lakeview is not yet built, but has received from the Planning Commission a final subdivision approval. It's not yet built. It's underway. Horizontal infrastructure has been built for the most part. Horizontal infrastructure, meaning roads primarily,
Right.
has been built, but the neighborhood hasn't been built. So certificates of occupancy have not yet been procured. So they could meet the 1/3 threshold. You could change this ordinance if you felt comfortable forwarding this ordinance. You may want to change it. It may want to be a higher threshold, or it may want to be something different. You may not feel comfortable forwarding this ordinance. That's fine too, right? But right now, Lakeview and Deer Springs are the only two that would really qualify for this. And Deer Springs has only phase 1 and phase 2A and 2B that have final subdivision approval. So maybe it falls back to, if you thought this was an appropriate ordinance, maybe it falls back to final subdivision approval and we tweak the ordinance, to be clear.
Yeah, another thing, Jonathan, to consider too is if we put in something where there has to be some sort of self-sustaining commercial, is you have to wonder if the developer is willing to take the risk to do that and give up doors that he can actually sell.
Good point.
Yeah,
I like
that's
that
correct.
idea.
Yeah,
If we're gonna do it, I like that idea.
the commercial component is something that Lakeview would not qualify for. Deer Springs could, because they do not yet have final subdivision approval. They only have phase 2, phase 1, phase 2A, 2B, and they do not have phases 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yet approved by way of planning commission.
They have some commercial proposed if they do that cottage idea.
That's correct. So Nate Brockbank brought to you phase 8, which is way out of order because, again, phase 1 is under construction, phase 2 and 2B is under construction. So he brought phase 8 to you and he said, I might consider cottage development, give you the housing diversity that you want, and I would put commercial up there. And so I personally, I thought that was a good proposal, right? After that, the second meeting, he came back to you and said that he thought that additional phases should be included in the nightly rental category. And so that is up for discussion. But I do think that a commercial component does start to make it more palatable. When you get into nightly rentals, you're really into a kind of a resort land use, right? It's a short-term rental overlay. I think in the ordinance we have 3 or 4. I think we have 3-day minimum stays, and so it is really venturing on a commercial overlay district, and so there is a nexus between that and a commercial component to that, and so we could incorporate a commercial component. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And Thomas, would we be able theoretically to, and I'm just using Nate's issues as an example, but each phase require X amount of commercial space?
Yeah, the way that we have tentatively thought about a commercial component for the short-term rental overlay, I haven't fully vetted this out, but my initial thinking would be that it would be my initial thought was 15 units, but I think that may be a little bit too low. I think maybe the number is about 25 units. For every 25 units, there's a commercial component requirement for the short-term rental overlay designation. Certainly that's up to you guys to determine. It's hard to define that metric, but somewhere probably between 15 and 30 units makes a little bit of sense. A cafe, a coffee shop, a sundry facility where they can buy milk and cheese and bread and things like that. And so that is up for discussion, but that is a logical nexus. There is a logical nexus for that commercial amenity for resort amenities, i.e. short-term.
So Thomas, I have a question, and again, using Nate's
Sure.
development as an example. I
Sure.
understand the west side of the Jordanelle, that's kind of separated and putting commercial in there. But if we're talking phases 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's on the east side, like on the hillside, correct?
You're correct. That's between Jordanelle Parkway and SR 248. Yes.
Okay, so now we're talking about having all of these residential properties and then interspersing commercial in there as well. Is that?
That,
Okay.
based on the discussion over the past 30 seconds, yes, you are correct. That is what we would be talking about. Yes.
Okay, so we're going to have commercial right next to residential and mixed in with residential.
It would be kind of a mixed use component, which is not a bad thing if it's a cafe, a coffee shop, things like that. But yeah, you're right. That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
So Jonathan, have we gotten any update from Nate? Because I know this was a while ago that we had the discussion. Is he definitely, if we don't approve the short-term rental in the east side, that he wouldn't still go with the phase eight?
Hey, Rachel, I can give you my quick update and then Jonathan and or anybody else can jump in. Based on what I understand, initially, the Planning Commission was somewhat receptive to nightly rental on the west side of Jordanelle Parkway. Upon further consideration, Nate and his team really felt like they needed additional opportunities for nightly rental on the east side of Jordanelle Parkway. So again, that would be kind of phases 2, 3, and 4. So he kind of said at the last, I think it was maybe it was 3 meetings ago, he kind of said it was an all or none. If you give it to me for phase 8, it's not good enough. I'll just leave it as is. If you give it to me for phases 2, 3, and 4, I'd consider it because that starts to make sense. So it was a little bit of not enough just on the west side of Jordanelle Parkway, but I needed a little bit on the east side of Jordanelle Parkway. It was an all or none for him and his team. Unless anybody else knows anything differently.
That's all. That's Thomas. You seem to know more about it than I do.
After the public hearing part, can we send it up to the town council that we
Don't we
would
need to take a vote?
no, that we would potentially say yes to this, but it needs tighter restrictions.
You,
Do we
think
need to define
if
those?
that's what we want to do.
No. I'm just throwing it out there. Do we need to define restrictions or do we not?
Well,
Glennis, what I was going to say is, if we're leaning towards that, we could put it over for a date certain in August. We can and continue to look into how much, for an example, how much commercial per phase do we want to require to, and come up with some other, a little more defining, lack of a better term, characteristics for this before we pass it on to the town council.
I would say the role of the planning commission is to really get in the weeds and put restriction, give a recommendation of what you think is best. You have 3 choices for, you can forward a negative recommendation, you could forward a positive recommendation, and of course you can amend what the recommendation is, or you can continue it to a date certain.
Personally, I like Tony's idea of refining this a little further, including some commercial, personally limiting the geography. So I'm leaning towards refining this a little further before we make any kind of recommendation.
Can we hear from the public?
No, we have to, because it's on for public discussion.
that's correct. So, Mr. Chairman, you're welcome to open it up to the public now if you guys want to get the public input, and then we can start to have a discussion with regard to a refinement of conditions and or a negative or positive approval recommendation.
Okay, so for anybody who's listening and wants to join the discussion, if you're on the phone, you have to hit *9 If you're on a regular PC, it's alternate and Y. If you're on a Mac, it's option Y to participate in the discussion. After you're called, just please state your name and your address for the record. And then go forth with your question. Carol?
Hi, this is Carol Tomas. I live at 11831 Stargazer Circle. And I do have some concern about the nightly rentals. I'm okay with it on the west side of the Jordanelle Parkway to put in commercial and allow nightly rentals through the Deer Springs neighborhood is absolutely, I think, unacceptable. That will create a lot of unfamiliar traffic on that street that's quite steep that a lot of people use on bicycles, not just residents of Hideout, but people who ride out to Browns Canyon and down to Camas. And there's going to be that's a very steep hill. It's windy. And if you have non-residents there who are not familiar with the traffic flow, that could be a safety issue. In addition, I think that Mr. Bronkbag should probably, if he wants this all or nothing concept, he needs to come to the table and give something back to the community of Hideout in order to get his sales up by allowing nightly rentals and having commercial. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashlyn, Doran Security.
Sorry, it's Ann Gruber. I live at 452 East Overlook Loop. I want to understand the nexus of why the Planning Commission feels like this is important to concede. I think that Hideout started with the concept of that this was not something that we were interested in this community. And I'm curious as to why it is now something where I think we feel like we have to make a concession here. And I agree with Carol's kind of assertion, which is, we're doing it only to pump up the developer's ability to sell their units at, dangling the carrot for them. And I just want to understand what's really in it for the town of Hideout long-term. What does it change the fabric of Hideout long-term? And why entertain it at all?
First of all, ma'am, nobody's conceding anything. We're just exploring the options that are in front of us.
We do get some economic benefit as well.
Yeah, I would just add two pieces to that, and I would say that it's just for consideration, and it is to look at opportunities to locate a land use and potentially benefit the town of Hideout relative to some financial gain in terms of short-term rental and or transient room tax. But that is the only I think that is the reason it's being discussed now. There is no direction right now in terms of where I think Planning Commission or Town Council lies.
Do you have any other questions, ma'am? Mr. Silver.
Good evening. Thanks for taking the comments. First off, I'd like to echo the concerns that
State your address, please, Mr. Silver.
Oh, I'm sorry. 11419 North Vantage Lane.
Thank you.
You bet. Sorry about that. I'd like to echo the comments on the concern about rushing through things and maybe slow things down and see how things are progressing. One of the new developments in our community has certainly been the expansion of the Ross Creek Trailhead into Jordanelle State Park, and I don't think anyone knows what the enhanced facilities there will bring to that entrance as well. Since these developments and these questions target probably that entrance much more than the other entrance in the Hideout, I think it's probably worth getting some experience with what that new facility will create. So I'd just like to add that into the considerations of things you're discussing as you consider this. So thanks for taking the comment. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Ashland Door and Security again.
Sorry, Ann Gruber, 452 Overlook. I remuted myself, and so I wasn't able to respond when you spoke earlier, but I guess the question is the focus on commercial activity revenue or on the taxation of short-term rentals that may lead to additional revenues? Is the commercial element more lucrative to the town than this tax? I don't understand necessarily the tax implications of one, but it seems to me if the town is going to flex their muscle on future development of the town, we should focus it toward commercial developments. I'm not sure that I think that short-term rentals necessarily contribute the same as commercial development. And I'm asking that, I guess, as a question as much as a statement.
Well, first, ma'am, if you want to develop some commercial properties, you need somebody to come in that's willing to come in. So
Understood.
It's not just the town going out and saying this is what we want to do commercial and have commercial here. You still need vendors that are willing to come in.
And maybe Ms. Gruber, I would take this even a step further, that I think you're right. I think that commercial development is something that we have heard from the community that is desirous. And so that, I think, is the reason that maybe a commercial component of short-term rentals is being potentially considered, being thrown on the table. I would also say that, yeah, there is a benefit to the transient room tax sales revenue for the town budget, but where and how we locate that commercial is certainly important. That's exactly right. That is what is up for discussion.
Anything else, ma'am?
Sorry, I try not to be disruptive, so I keep muting, but then I keep remembering I can't get back in. No, I just think that as a town, we should focus. I think that we're in our infancy in development, and that I think that we should be careful in setting a precedent that then is hard to retract from later, and that for future development, we want to understand what tax base it brings in, and I'd like to understand the actual dollars and benefit versus the cons. You know, I'd like to understand the benefit, what the town gets versus, you know, how does it detract from the value of Hideout as a community. That's all I would like considered.
Thank you. Anything else? Patricia Bidwell?
The comment that I would have is
Ma'am,
similar.
could you please state your address first
Um,
and your name?
Patricia Bidwell, 1962 Purchase Drive. Right now I'm in Glenview, Illinois, but I hope to live in Hideout permanently. And my comment is that I've been struggling to see a lot of strategic planning in Hideout's plans. And so if you approve a zone change that's relative to a strategic plan of where the zone changes would apply, it's much more acceptable. You have a much more of a comforting feeling of what's going on. But so far, just approving a zone change without having more of a long-term strategic plan is, I'm not in favor of.
Thank you, ma'am. Larry E.
Yes, hi, my name is Larry Eisenfeld. I live on 11853 Stargazer in Deer Waters. And I'm sorry I got in late, so if this has already been answered, I apologize. But is there any differentiation between existing communities and future communities as far as short-term rentals is concerned?
I might be able to answer that, Mr. Chairman. So, hi, Larry. And so the proposed ordinance would be that an existing approved subdivision that does not have more than 1/3 of the units in receipt of certificates of occupancy would not qualify for the short-term rental overlay designation. And so, to your point, if there's an existing subdivision that is already built out, greater than 1/3 of the units receiving certificates of occupancy, which basically means that families, households can actually move into a unit, a development, a single family detached unit, they wouldn't qualify for the short-term rental. This would only be for new developments.
Okay, thank you. I apologize.
No, thanks for the question. That's great.
Young?
Hi, this is Young Lee, 386 East Overlook Loop, and then 1189 North Shoreline Drive. So my question is, if Lakeview applied for short-term rentals, then how would the town propose to control traffic, including speeding, especially with short-term rental guests? Because right now, short-term rentals are in Deer Springs and Claim, which doesn't affect the other neighborhoods, and it could be discrete or it's isolated. But then you bring in a development like Lakeview, and that affects some of the main arteries of the town.
Mr. Lee, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Lee, I just take a quick stab at this, and I would say you're right. That is something that we have to look at. And Lakeview is the only other outside of Deer Springs subdivision, the only other subdivision that could qualify for this. And so you bring up a good question. The way the ordinance has been drafted at present is that short-term rentals would have to be for 3 days or more. And so in theory, doesn't mean in practice, but in theory, there would be less practice just because there would be less movement back and forth because people would be there for a slightly longer term. They couldn't stay for 1 or 2 nights. They have to stay for 3. But that is a good question, something the Planning Commission may have to consider. Again, right now, the only 2 subdivisions that would qualify are Lakeview and Deer Springs on the north end of the town of Hideout.
Okay, thank you.
Carol, you have another question?
I don't have another question, but I do have another comment. And this is regarding the benefit to the developer. I can see that the town of Hideout would benefit for some of the nightly rental tax. And that would be nice for us, but we're going to have some additional commercial tax revenue at the Bloom development, which may not happen this year or next year, but it will eventually happen. So I don't think that we should focus on nightly rentals as taxes as a source of revenue. I think we should look at that as a detriment to our community, especially when the person that it benefits the most is the developer. I don't think that we as a town will benefit as much as the developer in long-term sales with short-term rentals. Thank you.
Carol, first I'll address what you opened with. There's no guarantee that the Bloom project will go forward, especially in the way that it was originally presented. So you cannot count on that.
I know we can't count on that, but we can count on additional traffic, people who don't know our neighborhood, strangers in our area, if we allow nightly rentals. Eventually, Hideout will find a way to get commercial income revenue.
Thank you.
I'd like to share my thoughts about all this. I actually really agree with what Carol just said. And I'm really not comfortable with the short-term rentals in any areas that are in the center part of Hideout. When it was proposed for Bloom, I actually liked the idea because it was removed from the rest of the town. What I would like to see is us put this off for maybe a year and come back and revisit it down the road, because I just don't think we're really ready to make any commitment to short-term rentals. That's my opinion.
I like
Thank
the,
you.
I like the idea that, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who,
Miss Bidwell.
well, no, the person who suggested that we kind of wait and see what happens at the new park, the new state park with their build out there. I think that's a good idea.
Mr. Young?
Hi, one follow-up question. So, I mean, I'm opposed to short-term rentals as well, or the expansion of it, but is our contract with the sheriff's office, does it account for an influx of short-term rentals as well, or does that require amendments and additional costs and who will bear that cost if there are any?
I could say I'm not privy to the contract with the sheriff's department, so I could not answer that question, Mr. Lee.
Okay.
I can't answer that specifically, but I would say that that is something that the town of Hideout, if this ordinance were to move forward, would have to coordinate with them. But it would be in the same way that other communities and our existing nightly rental neighborhoods coordinate with the town of Hideout. We have an ordinance in place. The town of Hideout has an ordinance in place that addresses nightly rentals in terms of requirements for in terms of kind of health, safety, welfare issues relative to nightly rentals. That would continue to be enforced and coordinated not only with the town of Hideout, but with the sheriff's office. The details of that, as if it indeed were expanded, would have to be discussed with the sheriff's office. That is something that we would have to do.
Are there any other questions or public comments in regard to this? There being none, we will close the public comment part of this. And now it becomes a question for the council. Do we want to delve into this deeper and put it over? Or for a date uncertain? We'll take a vote on it.
I think we push it out.
I kind of
Jonathan?
think that we need to refine, if this is to go forward, I think it needs a lot of refinement. If it's gonna die here, then it's moot, but I think we ought to at least vet it as much as possible before making any decision or recommendation to the council.
Glennis, your thoughts?
Can't unmute. I am in agreement with that, with Jonathan and Peter.
Rachel?
I'm sorry, I just had a distraction for a second. So what are you asking?
Your feelings towards taking a vote or putting this over for a date certain so we could delve much deeper and refine this a little bit better before we make a decision?
Well, I already told you my opinion. I'm voting against it. So I mean, if you want to delay it, that's fine. But I kind of think we should push it down the road to not even really be discussing it yet. But
All right. Thank you. Joel?
I'd like to delay it till a date uncertain until we have more time to vet it out.
We'll make it a date certain, so just so we don't have
Date
to
certain, sorry.
do a mailing.
Sure.
Polly, question for you. If we put this over to a date certain, do we have to entertain the casita part? Or that's contingent upon this?
No, keep in mind, these are two independent ordinances, so they are not connected. So you could carry this to a date certain, independent of the resort, I'm sorry, of the residential casita zoning.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to push this out?
I'll make the motion that we push this out and refine it further before we make any recommendation.
And I would just make a request, if you are going to continue it to a date certain, we may want to say either at next month's meeting or the following month's meeting. I think we have to give it a specific date, and Alicia can correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. Well, even if we make it for the 24th meeting, and we still are not happy with it, we could push it out for a date certain to September also if we need to, correct?
That's correct. You just have to set a date that you carry it to so the public can follow. Yeah.
And if you do set it to a date certain, you would have to hold the public hearing. But if there's no information, you can still tell them, hey, we're really going to talk about this in a month.
That's fine. So we'll just continue to have a public hearing on this if we put it to August 24th. Right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, so Jonathan, do you want to kind of amend your recommendation?
Yes, so amended to reflect that last statement.
The 24th of August?
Yes.
Does anybody second that?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Peter. So we'll take a vote. Glynis,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Rachel,
I guess I'll say no.
Joel,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Tony's a yes. Donna, are you on? Okay. So this worked. So then the discussion for short-term rental overlay ordinance will be continued to a date certain, which is August 24th. Next on the agenda, the creation of a new zoning district, residential casitas. Thomas, do you want to just run through this?
Sure.
Wait, Thomas, can I ask you a quick question? Are the casitas by definition nightly rentals?
No, they are not. They're actually a smaller kind of cottage / casita housing typology. They're actually a little bit different. Just so you are aware, the Bloom proposal did include casitas as part of their nightly rental proposal. That they don't have to be. They're just simply smaller units that allow step-up housing and step-up housing for those entering the housing market, and step-down housing for those wanting to step out of their 35/4,000 square foot units as kids leave home to step down into. So they don't have to be nightly rental units. As part of the Bloom project, yes, they were proposed as that. Mr. Chairman, do you want me to walk through this kind of quickly? I know you guys have discussed this. I think that it's worth noting that this proposed zoning designation does not have a geography as of yet. It was earlier considered as a part of both Bloom development, which again, they've withdrawn their application, and potentially as a part of the Deer Springs development. You discussed that a little bit earlier tonight, part of phase 8. Cottages / casita development, smaller unit development. The idea behind this development, the idea behind this zoning designation would be that it would allow for cottage development, casita development concepts. These would be units that would be less than approximately 1,500 square feet. If you kind of scroll, Alicia, are you in control of this screen? If you could scroll down a little bit. maybe to the table. That might be helpful for folks. Yep, as you get down here, the layout in this particular proposed zoning ordinance, draft zoning ordinance, I should say, is the same as the existing zoning designations in the zoning ordinance. And so you can see here that the casitas, the cottage development units, would be a permitted use as a part of the RC zoning designation. If you scroll down a little further, you can see what might be community amenities that could be considered conditional uses. An amphitheater, a community center, a church or worship center could be considered a conditional use. Keep in mind, a conditional use is a use that is permitted subject to criteria. It does come back to the Planning Commission for review. Scroll down a little further, a swimming pool or a bathhouse, kind of an amenity for the casita development, could be permitted as a permitted use, not a conditional use. That would just be by right. They would come in and get that. Scroll down a little further. Fitness center, maintenance facility, meeting facilities, office, personal services, restaurants less than 2,000 square feet, if you scroll down a little bit further, would be potential conditional uses. Those are uses that would come back to the Planning Commission for final review and approval. Scroll down a little bit beyond that. There was a discussion with regard to density. If you keep going down, there was discussion with regard to density at the last Planning Commission meeting. And the idea for casita or cottage development, we're looking at, again, 1,500 square foot units. The idea is that these would be smaller units. They would be potentially more affordable, potentially into the workforce income levels. The idea is that they would be on approximately maybe 35, as small a lot as 3,500 square feet, as you can see on this particular table. And so the density could be as much as 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 per unit. That was a little bit too much density for the Planning Commission at the last meeting. And so that density has been reduced to 8 per acre. And so the ERUs would be 8 per acre. That actually makes some sense. 8 per acre at 3,500 square feet is, approximately 27,000 square feet for 8 units per acre. An acre is about 43,560 square feet. And so it's less than a full acre, but there is a requirement for open space right below that number 8. And so it actually fits in a little bit better at 8. Planning Commission was concerned at the higher number. So you all definitely wanted to confirm that open space would be a part of a casita or cottage development. Scroll down a little bit more, you see the minimum lot frontage. We didn't have a lot frontage on the first one. Can you scroll up just a little bit, Alicia? I'm sorry. We didn't have just a little bit more. We didn't have a lot frontage minimum, just so everybody is aware, on the first go round in the draft last month. We thought a little bit more about it, and we put in a 50-foot lot minimum. That's a relatively small lot frontage minimum. So that is the width at the right of way. We didn't put one in initially because there was the idea that you could have a couple of 2 or 3 or even 4 cottages at the end of a private driveway, so that maybe we wouldn't want a lot frontage because they could be kind of this little bit of a cluster development. Again, they'd have to maintain the 3,500 square foot lot minimum, but they would be maybe set in the woods. Bloom had actually brought this up. They could be set in the woods. They could be set back from the public right of way. And so we didn't have a lot frontage. Since then, we've thought might as well go ahead and include the lot frontage. Bloom has pulled their application, and so might as well include a lot frontage. If somebody wants a variance, or if somebody wants to come in to propose something different, we can look at that at the time of application, but a lot frontage at 50 feet is pretty normal. We noted that it could be reduced by way of Planning Commission. If you scroll down a little bit, Alicia, by way of Planning Commission and council approval, if it were a cluster development. You can see the lot width there again is 50, so pretty much 50 feet from the right of way in front, the front of the property, all the way back to the property would be 50. The minimum lot depth would be about 70. Again, lot coverage, it could be a single story unit at 1,500 square feet. It could be a two-story unit at about 750 square feet, but maximum is 1,500 square feet pursuant to this ordinance. So these are small unit developments. You can see the setbacks. These are relatively, just so you all are familiar with it, they're relatively similar to the R6, the residential six units per acre zoning that we have in town. These are a little bit more restrictive, but not much. You can see the front setback is 35. That still allows a front driveway, still allows streetscaping, still allows a driveway that would accommodate a 20-25 foot driveway length driveway to accommodate a truck, an F-150, if you will, or something even greater, so that it doesn't stick out into the right of way or cause any issues with regard to snow removal, snow plows, etc. So there is a decent setback. You can see the setbacks from major roads is actually a little bit more. The setback from the highway, which would be SR 248, is 50. Minimum rear yard setbacks are 25 feet and 20 feet from side yard setback. Offsets are kind of creating a little bit of a variation in setback from the front right of way. We've got 15 feet, or I think that's supposed to say 15 degrees. I'm sorry, 15 degrees, kind of a little bit of an angle for that unit, or 10 feet, i.e. one of those units could be set back at the minimum front setback you see at the top there is 35 feet. Another one could be set back at 40 or 45 feet, and there could be a little bit of variation just to give a little bit of character to that particular development. If you scroll down a little bit more, the height is 25 feet or 2 stories, whichever is less. Units per building is 1. These are single family units. There is no multifamily allowance in this proposed ordinance. And then you can see in terms of driveway, we're not proposing that they have to have a garage. These are cottage units, but they could have a garage. That would be a conditional use. That means it comes back to the planning commission. But in no case could they have less than 1 parking space per cottage. Again, part of the thinking behind this was relative to the Bloom development. And the idea was that people could pull in, park at their little casita, and kind of be in the woods and kind of be out in nature, if you will, right? So the idea of not having a lot of parking, not having a lot of asphalt, not having a lot of issues with stormwater runoff, et cetera, would be a benefit to that. And so that's why you see the 1 unit minimum, no garage required, but it can be allowed as a conditional use. You can see there the driveway dimensions, a maximum of 20 feet in width, a minimum of 12. The driveway has to be a minimum of 24. That again allows for an F-150 basically. If you scroll down a little bit more, Alicia, thanks. You could start to see the allowances for the driveways, concrete or asphalt. That's primarily for snow shoveling. We wish that we could allow gravel. It's a little bit hard in our environment because of snow shoveling. And then 12.9.08 are the landscape and maintenance requirements. And then you see open space and design requirements. Those are the requirements that are also required as part of all of the residential zoning designations within the town. They would also apply to the residential casita zone as proposed. I think that's it. And so it's open for discussion. Again, it is worth noting that earlier there was a proposal for, I think it was a minimum, if you scroll up just a little bit, Alicia, to the very top of the tables, the first table actually, the minimum was 15 units per acre. We brought that down to 8 units per acre. There was significant concern by the Planning Commission that was just a little bit too dense, and so that's been reduced. If you have any questions, feel free to answer me. This is a public hearing, and so at the end of our discussion, we should open it up to the public and have a discussion and or questions.
Thomas, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, Joel.
Thomas, is the square footage for the garage part of the 1,500 square feet?
That would be additional to the 1,500 square feet, and that would be a conditional use. That would come back to the Planning Commission. That's in addition.
Okay, thank you.
Not just this particular ordinance, but or zoning. Do we have any restrictions on my pet peeve, that they don't like disturb any more land than is necessary.
So the landscaping and the sensitive lands overlay ordinance would apply to this. And so we would limit the limits of disturbance, the LOD, as it's referred to in the town ordinance. And so there would be a limitation to that. The same ordinance that applies to, say, a single family dwelling unit that could be larger than this, or a multifamily dwelling unit, would apply to this. Same requirements. Sensitive lands overlay, keep in mind, anything over 30% slope is prohibited from development unless reviewed and or approved by the planning commission, subject to the criteria in the ordinance. So those LODs, limits of disturbance, would be confined pursuant to the town ordinance. All of that applies to the residential casita.
I would like to see us incorporate one of Tony's ideas that he mentioned earlier, and that is for every X number of casitas, you provide some commercial space. For Thomas, I think you mentioned it, just to pick up a snack, a pizza, this, that, or the other thing. And so I would propose that we include for every 20 or so casitas that, and Thomas, I would defer to your judgment as to how much commercial space would be reasonable. But I think that ought to be part of this.
So we need to be careful about exactions. So I think that what we can do is say that, this zone requires it be mixed use or something like that, so that we get the same result, that what we're looking for is this be mixed use with commercial. But we can't really say, well, if you have 20 units, you need to have this amount of commercial, because that, I think, would at least open us up for litigation that it's an exaction.
Holly, what would be the right way to do that then?
Well, I think what we could do is say that, maybe change the purpose to say that it has to be a mix, that this is a classification that is only allowed where there's mixed use, as part of the zone or whatever it might be.
So I think that, Polly, along that line, maybe what we could do is kind of consider this a bit of I'll come up with the nomenclature, but it could be a bit of a mixed use casita zoning, right? It's a little bit higher density, obviously, with smaller lots. But we could come up with a commercial component, and I could start to come up with a metric for that, because I agree, we don't want an exaction. We want it to be part of a mixed use zoning ordinance. So we could recreate this a little bit in terms of mixed use casita and blank square feet of commercial development per unit. We can come up with something like that.
It just seems to me that people who don't live here are probably not going to bring a lot of groceries with them, and they might appreciate being able to run out and get something at the last minute. So I'd like to find a way to appropriately and legally and defensively incorporate something like that.
But this is not necessarily commercial, correct? This is just a different residential zone, so we don't have to have any commercial. It's just a smaller lot, a smaller house. Is that correct?
You're right. These are single family detached residential units. They're just limited in size. That makes them potentially more affordable. Again, it could be step down housing for folks who have their kids have gone to college and they're ready to step down into it. It could be step up housing. People have rented an apartment and or a small flat, a condo, and they're ready to step into a small unit. And so, yeah, you're right. They don't have to have commercial. Commercial is always a nice component to a community. The Planning Commission has noted over the course of the past couple of years that we sure do wish that we had a sundry shop, a place to buy milk, or a coffee shop, or a place to meet with my neighbors. It's not a requirement of this. These are just smaller units, but we can create a mixed use component for this. Yeah.
Anybody else on the commission have any other questions or statements they'd like to make in regard to this? There being none, then we will open this up to public comment if anybody has any. Once again, if you're on the phone, please hit *9. The regular PC, it's alternate and Y. A Mac, it's option Y if you want to participate in discussion.
Tony, I'm not sure if you see, but Carol Tomas has her hand raised. I don't see
Yes,
any.
Mr. Gruber is first.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
Mr. Gruber, please state your name and address first.
Sorry, I had it on mute. Jim Gruber, 452 East Overlook Loop. I thought that Bloom already had commercial parts of this, and I mean, isn't it being redundant, adding
Mr. Gruber, there is no Bloom project. They withdrew their proposal.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that was out then. So who's putting casitas in then?
So the idea for casita zoning is just that the town would have it as an available zoning district designation. We don't have a geography defined for it, but it would be available should a developer want to allow for / provide for smaller unit development. So right now there's no geography designated. It's just an allowed, it would be, if it were recommended here and approved by the town council, it would be a zoning designation that could be considered for future development.
Yeah, then I agree. I think there should be some kind of commercial aspect to it because we have none here. And to go 6 miles or 4 miles to get any kind of goods, commercial goods, where what we're doing is we're giving away our money that we could use in Hideout. That's
Thank you.
all.
No, thank you. That's a good point.
Thank you, sir. Carol Thomas.
Okay, so I just have a quick question about the affordable housing component of the casitas. What percentage of the proposed zoning would allow for affordable housing? Because we absolutely do need some affordable housing for people who are going to live and work in our community. Has that been established or that's still on the board?
Well, thanks for that question. That's a great one. Thanks, Carol. I would say that residential casita is not specifically designated for affordable housing. It doesn't have an affordable housing limit, housing price limit associated with it. The new state, the new state of Utah statutes don't allow for us to require affordable housing in the community. We can incentivize it, but we can't require it. And so these would simply be smaller units. And by definition, smaller units, less square feet, could potentially be slightly more affordable. But you're right, they may not be affordable to everybody, but they could be more affordable to some. We're not allowed to require affordable housing in the state of Utah. The new state legislation from a couple of years ago doesn't allow for us to require that. We can incentivize it, but we can't require it. We certainly have our Deer Mountain residential area that has some affordable units.
It does.
But we don't have an allowance pursuant to the state of Utah to require affordable housing as a part of new units. We can only incentivize it. So these are smaller and thereby affordable. And that is as good as the state allows us outside of additional incentives.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Mr. Lee.
Hi, just a quick question. Is this drafted in a way so that it's only for new development? So people with large existing lots can't backdoor an ADU into their lots?
Yeah, this is designed that it would be for a unique a unique lot. So it's not a
Okay.
portion of the lot, it's for a unique lot. So it's not addressing ADUs, it's simply addressing smaller single-family detached dwelling units. Good point.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gruber, do you have another question? Are there any other questions for the commission or public comment? There being none, we will close the public discussion portion of this. And now the town planning commission, excuse me, will decide if we want to vote on this, or put it over to a date certain, whereas Jonathan recommended maybe we delve into the, a little bit different wording of it for some commercial business.
Tony, I'm really sorry. Before you make the motion, Patricia did have her hand up and there was some confusion on
Okay,
with her unmuting. So I apologize. That was my
no
fault.
problem.
Thank you for letting her speak.
Patricia, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think the very fact that we don't have a specific definition of what casita entails is problematic. When Bloom was presenting, I thought Bloom's presentation to some of us in Golden Eagle was very interesting because their casita definition was for higher end people, which I'm not saying that's the only thing I would, consider, but it's the fact that there's casitas, there's nightly rentals, there's commercial, there's single family space. So it figures into a whole plan of what the development looks like. If you don't have a specific definition of what casita is, that it could be for, in their plan, it was $1,000 a night because they had quite a high-end design concept, or it could be for, housing for people that is more affordable. That's very hard to approve. I mean, we need to be more specific. So that's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That is something we can look at, just so you are aware. We're not technically, by way of zoning ordinances, we're not allowed to look at incomes or household incomes for housing, but smaller housing in theory could be more affordable just because there are fewer square feet. And if you assume, say, for example, a baseline of 300 square feet, $300 per square foot for development cost, it could be a little bit less expensive. But really, the way we look at that is an allowance by size, but not by income. But that is something that we can start to look at a little bit more in detail.
Thank you.
There being no more public comment or questions, we will now go back to deciding if the planning commission would like to vote on this, put it over to a date certain,
I would
or
move
put it
that
over
we-
to certain.
I would move that we do with this item what we did with the last item. Move it to a date certain so that we can refine it a little further and then decide based on the refinements whether or not we want to make a recommendation.
Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second that.
And
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, if I could just clarify, so it sounds like we're continuing this to a date certain, which would be August 24th. So the public is aware when it would come back to you all.
Correct.
Okay.
Does anybody else would anybody like to, well, that motion was already second, so we'll take a vote. Glynis,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes,
Rachel,
Yes.
Joel,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
And Tony's a yes. So this will be put over to a date certain, which will be August 24th, and it'll be open for public discussion at that time. Okay. That being said, there is no further business in front of the commission. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I would love to.
Seconded then.
Thank you. Okay, Glynis,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Joel,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
and Tony is a yes. Thank you all, and it's nice to get out at a reasonable hour for a change. Everybody enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend in the heat. And see you all next month.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.